He was treated as mentally disabled, held back twice before he reached high school, and was denied a seat in the industry because of the color of his skin. Yet out of these tragedies, Joe Dudley and his wife built one of the most powerful businesses in America, trained 30,000 professionals, opened an accredited university, and earned a permanent spot in Black history. So how did his little $10 bet grow to a $50 million company, and why did it fall? This is the rise of the old Dudley hair business empire, and the tragedy that brought it down. The boy no one believed in. The start of his story goes all the way back to May 9, 1937, the day when Joe Louis Dudley Sr. was born, the fifth of 11 children in Aurora, a small town near Beaufort, North Carolina. As we'll see, many difficult things stood out about his upbringing. His family had very little, the house was crowded, money was tight, and being a person of color wasn't considered normal at a time and place like that. But what often gets ignored is what happened to Joe before he even reached middle school. In the first grade, a teacher noticed that Joe struggled to speak clearly. His words always came out slow and tangled, stuck behind a stutter that made learning feel impossible. Instead of getting him the help he needed, the school simply labeled him as mentally disabled and held him back from getting promoted. They did this twice, and by the time Joe reached the 11th grade, he was years behind his peers. Given how primitive the school system was back in the early 40s and 50s, most kids in that situation never recovered, as the mentally disabled tag back then usually stuck until adulthood. But Joe Dudley refused to be dismissed that way. And with his mother's help and encouragement, he built an ambition to prove everyone wrong. That striving pattern would mark the rest of his life and ultimately lead to his future success. Yet it would also be the one thing that would end his fortune. But for now, Joe pushed through, and then he eventually graduated and enrolled at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro. There he studied business administration, and it was during a summer break from college in 1957 that everything changed. But not in a way he could have planned. One day he traveled to Brooklyn to get a job to help pay his tuition. What he found instead was a man standing on a street corner selling hair care products door to door. That man was working for Samuel Fuller, a Black entrepreneur who had built one of the most successful direct sales hair care companies in the country. The products came in a small kit that cost about $10, and with that money, Joe made a bet that would pay off with a fortune greater than anything he'd ever dream of. This was how it happened. The $10 bet. Joe Dudley was not a natural salesman in the traditional sense. He still struggled with his speech, couldn't write a polished pitch, or talk in an open room to investors. The one thing he had was a strong work ethic, and with that, he went door to door through African-American neighborhoods in Brooklyn, with the product kit in hand. Though he wasn't good at promotion, his persistence became practice, and the repeated practice made him much better. Slowly but surely, his sales increased, and within a few months, he had earned enough to pay for another semester at A&T. He went back to campus and kept selling Fuller products as a part-time job. And at this point, he'd become so good that Fuller himself noticed. Not long after, something very interesting happened. It was the summer of 1960, and while he was working in Brooklyn, Joe met a young woman named Eunice Mosley. She was a student at Talladega College in Alabama, and she was also selling Fuller products during the summer to pay her own tuition. With multiple things in common, they were in for a smooth start, and by the following year, they were married. That partnership would become the foundation of everything that followed. Fuller offered Joe the opportunity to become an independent distributor in North Carolina, and to make the work easier, the couple moved together to Greensboro to run the distributorship full-time. They built a client base in salons and barbershops across the region. They knew the city already from their time at A&T, and Greensboro knew them. The business was growing, and the future looked bright and stable from all angles. It seemed nothing could go wrong. Yet it was from that moment the floor had started to crack. The start of many problems. By late 1968, Fuller Products was struggling as a business. The company that had launched Joe Dudley's entire career was running low on inventory and losing ground to competitors. Things were starting to fall apart at the seams. For any other distributor, this would have been the end of the road. After all, a dried-up supply means no product, no sales, and no income. Yet at that moment, Joe and Eunice Dudley made a different decision. If Fuller Products could not supply them, then they would make their own. They started their business the following year, making products by mixing shampoo and hair care formulas by hand in the kitchen of their home at 1606 Woodbriar Avenue in Greensboro. And while this seemed archaic, even for the time, the products worked and many people liked them. Orders started coming in larger numbers, so much so that the local health regulations had to step in. The authorities insisted they could not legally make these kinds of products for sale out of a residential kitchen. With law enforcement at their necks, they had every legal reason to stop, but Joe Dudley and his wife did not. In less than a month, they went out and found a strip mall. There, Joe and Eunice bought space and officially opened Dudley's Beauty Center and Salon. From that location, he and Eunice manufactured their own product line, sold directly to salons, and kept building the client base that had stuck with them under the Fuller name. What happened next is the part that sounds impossible, even today. Unlike previous attempts and many cases within the industry at the time, from day one, the business worked. They didn't experience a few hard years of grinding through losses before earning a dollar or even a pivot or bailout. From day one, they made lots of cash, and by 1975, just a few years after mixing products in a kitchen, Joe Dudley had formally launched Dudley Products as a company and employed over 400 salespeople working the region. Yet all that success was only the beginning. The unknown strategy that earned them millions. What the Dudleys built after 1975 is where this story gets extraordinary. Most people who know the Dudley name know it from the products from the shampoos, the conditioners, the relaxers, the scalp treatments that were always used in black salons and barbershops across the Southeast. What many didn't know was that the product line was only one piece of what they were building. The Dudleys were planning to open a chain of beauty supply stores across the southeastern United States, and from that, they would also launch a beauty school. In that school, the Dudleys trained cosmetologists not just how to do hair but to own businesses, even as racial minorities. This performed exceptionally well, and from that success, the Dudleys would also open the Dudley Cosmetology University in Kernersville, North Carolina. This happened in 1988, and what happened the following year was the very successful launch of a full network of Dudley beauty schools across 8 locations. But here is what made Dudley different from almost every competitor in the market. While companies like Johnson Products were chasing retail shelf space, buying ads, and competing to get their bottles into drugstores, Joe Dudley knew his audience and built his entire distribution model around salons. And by early 1989, almost no American customer could walk into a salon for a hair care product without grabbing a bottle of Dudley shampoo off the shelf. You got Dudley products at the local salon at a lower price, as well as every licensed cosmetologist who had been trained to use them correctly, and that was an intentional move. The strategy meant that every Dudley sale came with a relationship. Every customer who used the product had a stylist who could explain it, demonstrate it, and recommend exactly what their hair needed. This way, customers naturally promoted the products to those who hadn't tried them, and the brand grew and expanded without Joe needing to spend money to buy ads or try to compete with other brands like the Johnsons. They had built a level of trust and personalization that no retail placement could compete with, and it built loyalty that kept families coming back for decades. Then, even after much success on store shelves, Joe and Eunice made a bold decision that shocked everyone within the industry. Together, they chose to keep most of their company's products out of traditional retail and promotion. Many thought that was a dumb decision, given how many customers bought stuff from retail stores. But interestingly enough, that decision protected Dudley from something that always destroyed many small consumer brands at the time. As most experienced promoters from the 80s would tell you, when a product lives on a shelf in a big box store, that store owns the relationship with the customer. The store can legally either cut the product, replace it with a competitor's version, or drop the price so low that the brand loses all its premium standing overnight. Dudley decided not to give any retailer that power, and now, every transaction went through a trained cosmetologist who understood the product and could speak to it from personal experience. It also reduced the cases of customers complaining about skin reactions due to different skin and hair types, and increased customer satisfaction with the brand even more. Their impact at the time was so strong that in 2009, almost 2 decades later, the popular filmmaker Chris Rock made a documentary. This film, titled Good Hair, explored the black hair care industry, and Dudley Products was one of the companies highlighted as a pillar of the industry. By their peak, Dudley Products had revenues climbing toward and beyond the $30 million mark, with a collection of products reaching over 400 items covering hair and skin cosmetics. The company shipped internationally and soon became a family business when Joe's daughter Ursula Dudley Oglesby joined the corporation and eventually took over as president and CEO of Dudley Beauty. Meanwhile, Joe Dudley was about to do something even more bizarre. Moving back to Chicago. While building Dudley Products into a national brand, Joe Dudley, to everyone's surprise, went back to help the man who had given him his start in life. Samuel Fuller, his original mentor, was watching Fuller Products collapse. The business that had launched Joe Dudley, Eunice Dudley, and dozens of other black entrepreneurs across the country was dying in plain sight. Fuller himself had hit one of the most public low points in African-American business history, including a tax lien that forced him to sell his mansion just to keep himself going. So when Fuller asked Dudley for help, it didn't come as much of a surprise given the ongoing situation. And Dudley could have easily said no. He had arguably every reason to. After all, he was running a thriving company, he had built his own legacy, and stepping back into a failing business carried enormous risk. Instead, he moved to Chicago in 1976 and ran both companies at the same time. Fuller Products and Dudley Products, these were businesses founded in two cities with one man holding both of them together. And he did that for 8 years. Many today believe that loyalty was not just personal, but was Dudley's professional philosophy. History tells us Joe Dudley believed that the foundation of any business was not the product itself, but the relationships built around it. He had watched Samuel B. Fuller build his business on that principle decades before. Back then, Fuller had trained an entire generation of entrepreneurs to go into communities they understood, sell products those communities actually needed, and build trust that no advertising campaign could manufacture. Dudley carried that lesson into everything he tried to do. When he trained his own salespeople, he was not just teaching them to move units. Rather, it's believed he was showing them how to listen to customers, to understand what a family needed, and to show up consistently enough that the community started depending on them for the most important stuff. But not all efforts rooted in goodwill led to good outcomes. As in 1984, it became clear that Fuller Products could not be saved in its original form. The best Joe could do was buy the rights to the Fuller name and the manufacturing process. And that was exactly what he did. With the needed money, he brought what was left of the legacy back with him to Greensboro, folding it into Dudley Products and honoring the man who had handed him a $10 sales kit 30 years before. Yet even more fascinating was the university he built. The Dudley Cosmetology University. It would be easy to look at the product company and call that the main achievement. But the people closest to the Dudley story keep saying that the schools matter just as much, if not more. To them at least, Dudley Cosmetology University was not simply a place where students learned to cut and color hair. It was a business school built inside a beauty school. Students who walked through those doors were taught to think like owners. They learned the economics of running a salon, how to build a client list, how to manage inventory, how to price services, and how to grow something that lasted. The Dudley philosophy, which Joe Dudley had lived personally, was that a skill by itself was not enough. To graduate from that university, every student had to know how to turn the skill into a business, and they all had to demonstrate it practically. From this, many graduates went on to open salons across the country. They developed their own product lines and mentored the next generation of stylists. The team of stylists who designed the makeup, signature looks, and wardrobe of former First Lady of the United States Michelle Obama were all graduates of this school. Most particularly, the former First Lady's personal hairstylist and her esthetician were elite graduates trained directly under the Dudley curriculum system. And for over 5 decades, the Kernersville and Greensboro campuses of Dudley Cosmetology University trained thousands of black beauty professionals who took their skills across the country. The school's influence had now spread out far beyond what any course catalog could capture. The goal of the university from its inception was now fulfilled: to always walk in with a skill and walk out with a future. But sadly, one major tragedy was about to end everything. The tragic end of an era. Joe Louis Dudley Sr. passed away on February 8, 2024. He was 86 years old and had spent nearly 70 years of his life always working, building, expanding, mentoring, and giving. His funeral was held at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Greensboro, and the tributes that came in afterwards painted a picture of a man who had used every resource he had, including his name, his money, and his time, to open doors for others. His wife, Eunice, who had been beside him since they met on the streets of Brooklyn in 1960, continued her role as a leader in the business to keep honoring his memory. But that too came to an end in 2026, after more than 52 years of operation on South Elm Street. Dudley Cosmetology University in Greensboro was shut down. Eunice Dudley, who was 83 at the time, said that while he loved the school's students and the community, the time had come to let the next generation lead. One thing she made clear was that she was not retiring, that she would continue mentoring and supporting her daughter's work in High Point. But the Greensboro campus, the institution that had trained so many and stood for so long, was now gone forever. The closing hit the community hard, and for many people in the Greensboro area, Dudley Cosmetology University had now become a land. The black hair care industry has always been a battlefield. Logistics have always been complicated, and its way of operation never fully defined. By the time Joe Dudley started mixing products in his kitchen, the major consumer brands in America did not make products for African-American hair. The few that existed were made by black-owned companies like Johnson Products and the company Dudley himself was building. These were not niche players, but were the only players for millions of customers. That, however, quickly changed over time, and the way it changed tells you something important about how the market works. As time went by, many people had a passion for natural hair, and as the movement grew and the consumer base expanded, mainstream corporations began paying attention. Companies with global budgets and massive distribution networks moved into the black hair care space with resources that independent black-owned brands simply could not match. Ironically, though, they did not invent better products but bought better distribution, shelf space, and unmatched advertising. And over time, those advantages over the black business owners slowly reshaped the market. This means that where Dudley's salon direct model had once been a strength, the rise of retail dominance and e-commerce had now begun to shift customer expectations. Consumers who once only got products at the salon were now able to browse online, compare ingredients, and buy from brands they discovered on social media. The loyalty that had been built face-to-face over decades now had to compete with algorithms and influencers and overnight shipping. The game had changed, and the Dudley business failed to catch up on time. And for that reason, the same forces that squeezed Johnson Products and absorbed dozens of black-owned beauty brands for over 50 years now pressed against the Dudley name as well. The company adapted, shifted, and kept going, begun to shift customer expectations. Consumers who once only got products at the salon were now able to browse online, compare ingredients, and buy from brands they discovered on social media. The loyalty that had been built face-to-face over decades now had to compete with algorithms and influencers and overnight shipping. The game had changed, and the Dudley business failed to catch up on time. And for that reason, the same forces that squeezed Johnson Products and absorbed dozens of black-owned beauty brands for over 50 years now pressed against the Dudley name as well. The company adapted, shifted, and kept going. But the peak years of the empire belonged to a specific era, and that era has passed, and now we'll explore all that was left behind. Joe Dudley's legacy. Today, among the many achievements he left behind was the Dudley Products Collegiate Sales Manager Trainee Program, which gave college students a pathway into real business experience. The Eunice Dudley Ladies Program served young women specifically, recognizing that the barriers for black women in business were real and required intentional support to dismantle. As many would say, there is a reason the title of Joe Dudley's own book begins with the phrase, "I am, I can, and I will." He had been told from childhood what he could not do. From speech struggles, the held-back years, the label of intellectual disability stamped on his file long before he could read properly. He had spent his entire life answering that with action, so when Ursula Dudley Oglesby talks about growing up in the Dudley household, she does not talk about wealth. Rather, many believe she talks about learning. She watched her parents fail at something and then watched her father say that failure was necessary and useful. She said he also taught him about thinking differently because of what she had been exposed to and about being remembered as someone who made people smile and genuinely tried to make a difference in the Black community. That is what the Dudleys passed down, not just a business, but a way of approaching the world. Samuel Fuller had done something similar for Joe Dudley decades before, handing him a $10 sales kit and a mindset that work and persistence could build something real. Dudley carried that forward for the rest of his life, multiplied it, and handed it to thousands of people who passed it on to thousands more. The Greensboro Cosmetology School on South Elm Street is now closed as well, but the product plant off Interstate 40 in Kernersville still carries the name. Ursula is still leading the company and Eunice is still mentoring. The story is not over, but the old chapter has ended, and it deserves to be told clearly and remembered properly. So, what is your perspective? Should Joe Dudley today be remembered as a hero or a business owner with lots of lessons on how to make good money? We'd love to hear your thoughts below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Black Status for more. Now click on the next video. You will enjoy it. Until next time, take care. Take